I don't know when it happened, but we seem to forget that hay and grass should actually be the most important thing you feed your horse. You got to think back however many years, you would have a home cooked meal. You wouldn't go and buy a ready meal or chips that just went straight in the oven, and pizza, and it's all that kind of takeaway culture and things. It's fast food, and it's ultimately trickled into horse feed, I think, unfortunately. If you're not putting feed in there, you're not buffering acid, and that's where after an hour they say a horse will start to feel hungry. After 2 hours they start to feel discomfort because of the acid build up, and then if you're going sort of 4 hours or more without putting food in there, you really are massively increasing their risk of gastric ulcers. If you read the ingredients lists and you are happy with everything that is listed there, crack on and keep feeding it.
This season is brought to you by the Harry Hall One Club.
Hello, happy Wednesday. How are you doing, Miri? You okay?
I'm good. Rhi got a new mic. Do you like it, guys? Hopefully it sounds clear as a bell, because we just had to do 48 test recordings to get it right. But here we are, learning as we go.
And once again, we bring you into the BTS of this podcast, because Miri and I don't get to catch up that often these days. So what we were doing was we'd have a test where we'd say something, and then we'd go back to the thing we were gossiping about, and then we'd stop to listen to the test recording, and then go back to the thing that we were just back and forth. It was very fun.
Was it fun? Did you find it fun?
I didn't find the setup enjoyable, but I find stilted stories. Enjoy those.
Yeah, stilted stories. How are you doing in this endless summer?
I don't love it. I'm really not. I don't love it. I'm not enjoying it.
Did you just say that I look brown?
Yeah. Well, yeah, brown, a bit red. Yeah.
I am in fact quite brown, maybe too brown. I'm really fed up of it now. It says it's going to be 34 degrees again on Thursday, and I'm thinking I don't want that. I've never really looked forward to it. There's now a fly in the room with me, which is going to be very upsetting for the entirety of this recording. But I've never really felt like this before, but I'm I really look forward to putting on a jumper and not being too hot in a pair of breeches, It's just really hard. And yes, it will rain, and yes, the grass will come back, but my grass is getting really damaged. And this was something that I wanted to talk about. Turnout in general actually was one of my points of topic of conversation for this preamble, because I saw a really interesting post the other day, which is called
Is this the one? I think, is this the one where they were too much turnout is a welfare issue? Yeah. I have to admit, I skim read it, so I don't have all the facts, but I was what is this? Because it got shared by other people.
It did, and I do think we should talk about it, because I do think it is important. There were some really off-piste parts of it, but there are some I think there's a really important conversation around turnout and anyway. But I am worried about the fact that the grass is, the roots are being damaged now by this long-standing dry spell that we've had, because even if you were to put rain on some areas, it's not going to come back, because the grass will have been killed off. You can kill grass, and it's really, I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but I'm really worried about it, and I can't not be worried about it, and I'm trying to find different ways. I'm moving into a next phase as such with the farm, which is quite cool, where we're going to be diversifying some of our turnout. We're going to be building a track system in a couple of the different fields, so we've got a gelding track and a mare track. It's really expensive to do these things, and this is the reality. It's going to cost me multiple £1,000s to be able to do it properly, and even then I'm not doing it really, really fancy. I'm literally going to be doing it bare minimum.
Yeah.
No, it would be above average, but not I'm not surfacing the whole thing, Yes. So we are making changes, but I can't make them instantly. But I'm looking forward to making some changes. I'm diversifying, and it feels good to diversify.
How are the ponies doing barefoot in this weather?
Interesting. What a great question, because I actually have an answer. So we had our trimmers. We have two. They come together, Emma and Emily. They're amazing, and they're so lovely working. It's so lovely working with women.
Do they work together normally, or do you just sync them to come together?
They're trained the same way. And Emily was coming all the way from Wales, and that was a lot for her to do the whole yard. And she would come and stay the night, and that was hard for her because if you don't have somewhere to stay, it's like 3 hours. So it's not like impossible, but if you're coming drive, it's a lot. So she now comes for the day, and Emma, who lives in Oxford, who's trained with the same person that Emily trained with, they come together, and they're brilliant because they're just, well, they're lovely with the horses, and they're very good, and they look at the move, and they know what they're looking at, and they're really doing a nice job. But we talked about this because their feet are so hard, and because they're hard, if they hit a stone, they break, and they're brittle. And Emily said that aqueous cream is the best thing that you can paint on your horse's feet. So aqueous cream is a water-based moisturiser. Now, I say water-based, it's not only water-based, it is also got some oil in it, but only a very small amount. And so what you have to be careful of is things like hoof oil. They block the natural function of the hoof, so we need to be a bit careful doing lots of hoof oiling. But aqueous cream, A, cheap as chips, really cheap, but B, it's good for the horse's feet, and it's bioavailable basically to the horse's bodies. So there you go. It's like the kind of thing that you put on eczema, and you have to be kind of careful. You can't put oil-based things on eczema-y stuff. So yeah, it's brilliant. So we've been painting the horse's feet every day since they've been, and they look completely different already, which is really cool. So other than that, the feet are good. They're just hard and tough. And yeah, but going back to that post about the turnout, do you think we should read it?
Yeah, read it.
Emotional Horsemanship by Loki Phillips. Too much turnout? Actually, no, that's a statement. There's no punctuation there, just too much turnout. This is a silent epidemic, and I have been a bit reticent to talk about it, but here we go. I'm preparing training plans and sequencing design to adapt to individual horses and people for a 3-month program. Our primary focus is on creating forward, free-moving horses that are happy to move, then focusing on their sense of collection, softness, and quickness. I have chosen these focus subjects this year after studying the cases of hundreds of horses and their people worldwide and found a big problem. Horses are refusing to move forwards unless you use a whip/spur/force at some level. This is a problem. There are solutions. What happens to a horse to cause them to consistently refuse to take a step or enjoy going forwards so they can work on their collection, their strength, their talents? One of nature's most kinesthetic and movement-loving beings suddenly reduced to stone unless we force them somehow. Where did we go wrong? Online, we see a lot of very important and correct advocacy working around turning horses out, because at a mainstream level there are still large percentages of the horse-owning population that do not. They keep horses in boxes. This is inappropriate. Some horses live in tiny chicken coops, which is funny because did you know that somebody called my stables the same as caged hens? Despite my stables being like the most ethical brand of stable.
There's a spectrum, right? And you're always going to be too far to the right on someone else's spectrum.
100%.
Right.
Anyway, some horses live in tiny chicken coop stalls or unless ridden. The advocacy work to give horses space and turnout is vital because the health problems for horses who cannot freely move are serious. But over here in my work, people who lock horses in stalls do not come to Lockie for my team for help. We repel them. We feel unwelcoming to them because you best believe we will not collude with folks committed to locking horses away. That accountability is terrifying to them, so they don't work with me/us. The side of the fence, all my clients turn their horses out as much as they can. All of them. On this side of the fence, I am seeing the other side of the turnout problem. Too much turnout. Work on a problem long enough, you learn that the spectrum is in fact a circle. What I am seeing, horses have so much turnout that they become exhausted by it. So, when we come to work together with them in training, they have no gas in the tank. They're good anti-inflammatory diets, low in calorie and forage-based, give them enough to live outside, but not enough juice to overflow with energy that we can ethically work within the training. Their paddocks and turnouts have shelters, but their shelters are often dark, dead ends they wouldn't dare sleep in. They face into wind or lack bedding to lay comfortably down in, or their herds are complex enough that some members worry about laying down, lest another horse come and push them around. Day by day, the sleep deprivation adds up, and within 1 year or two, we start to see inflammatory disease, autoimmune symptoms, loss of vitality, and in training, horses that collapse. I mean, that is serious. Wow. We have turned turnout into a new job, and our horses are often becoming tired of it. We've been talking a lot about the summer and the heat in this season of the podcast. And although we love the summer because it's nice to be outside with our horses when it's warm and sunny, it doesn't mean that it comes without risks. Warmer weather can mean dry, hard ground and colic triggers like dehydration. These things could impact your horse at any time. This is why having the right cover in place makes all the difference, especially to your stress levels. That is why Harry Hall One Club offers vet fee cover you can rely on. From just £8.40 per month, it covers you for accidental external visible injury. That's injuries from accidents like cuts and wounds, rather than illness, and there is no upper age limit or vetting required. With transparent pricing, you pay the same as everyone else, and they truly believe that every horse matters, so the prices are the same for every horse. They don't ask you to choose your favourite horse if you own more than one, and you can cover multiple horses with no extra premium and share your vet fee cover value across all of them. And because everybody has different needs, you also have the flexibility to add optional cover like colic surgery, disposal, mortality, theft and straying. It is all part of the Harry Hall One Club approach, giving you practical, straightforward cover that works for the real equestrian life. Now, most of us can begrudge paying out for insurance each month because it sometimes feels like it doesn't offer much value unless you actually need to make a claim, but this is where Harry Hall One Club is refreshingly different. It's the go-to equestrian membership that combines insurance and money-saving perks together in one simple package from as little as £5.75 per month. To get cover, you simply sign up as a One Club member. This gives you public liability, personal accident and equine legal expenses cover as standard. When you join, you get perks included such as a legal helpline, 24/7 counselling service, free delivery, returns and exclusive discounts on harryhall.com, partner offers and event tickets. It helps you ensure you're getting your money's worth all year round, even if you never need to claim. So you could get all of that plus vet fee cover from as little as £14.15 per month. Members trust Harry Hall too, with thousands of excellent reviews and a reputation built since 1891, with a track record of paying over 99% of valid claims within 14 days and over 95% of their reviewers recommending Harry Hall. Plus, you'll always get friendly, Yorkshire-based support when you need it. So you can feel confident if something does go wrong, you'll be supported when it matters most. You can take their 2-minute quiz via the link in the show notes and it'll help you find out which membership level might be fit for you. Plus, when you join and get cover, you'll receive a £10 gift voucher to spend at harryhall.com. And if it's not for you, you can cancel within 14 days. No stress. Join the One Club and get cover today. Back to the podcast. So he goes on, it's quite a long post, and he goes on to say that this is not a 100% rule. Generally, horses living in turnout are happier and healthier than horses that do not. I'm just saying that from where I am standing, some of us have overcorrected and overexposed our horses. And it is a really interesting conversation to have because you do see some horses who are not given appropriate time to rest.
Yes,
now,
I agree.
When that then comes into they don't have enough energy for exercise, I feel like is a bit of a weird take. And there were some points on that. I guess it's maybe he's saying that's where that shows up. You know, that's where you see it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly know that my coach, for example, has had conversations with people who switch their turnout. So Harley lives out overnight all year round, but some of the yard will live out during the day in the winter and then they switch to night turnout in the summer. And when those horses switch, particularly if there is a lot of grass to begin with, they come in and they're like knackered in the morning and they're kind of full. And then she, you know, her advice is, well, don't ride them straight after they've come in because, you know, they're tired and they need a break and whatever. And obviously that applies sometimes to Harley, but often now he's just like used to it. So I get it from that point of view. Like they come in, we've all seen them when there's a lot of grass, they come in, they're tired, they want to lie down. Particularly, I think if they're lower down the pecking order, if we even agree that that's still a thing, that pecking orders are generally sort of fixed-ish, that they do struggle to get enough sleep when they don't have their own space. I guess, does it matter like what the turnout looks like? Because if they are on acres and acres and acres and acres, surely that isn't going to give you the same symptoms as a horse who's on a tiny postage stamp, for example.
Yeah, well, I think if a horse is doing a lot of miles as such, you know, like if they're moving around a lot of space, then they are going to use up more of their spoons. If you say, you know, a horse gets so many spoons in a day like we do, if they use up all of those spoons just existing, then there may be less gas in the tank, like he's saying, to then perform as such. Now, I don't believe that is then means that then you shouldn't turn your horse out. Yeah. And that's, I think, the important thing. But it is making sure that your horse does have opportunity for adequate rest. You know, I was thinking about Abbott's View, the track livery that Amy Dell she came here and we did a YouTube video on it, but she came here and gave me some advice about setting up a track here. You know, she's got this amazing big barn set up, and the horses come off the track and they all come into this big barn and sleep together. And I still haven't been, but I would love to go and view, like see and watch the horses at Net, the wild horses, because I do think that is a big part of what horses do. They move around, they come in, they all loaf together. They stand or they sleep. Some will sleep, some will rest, and then they'll go off and eat, and then they'll come back. You know, when we had Jane Myers on from Equicentral, she was saying, you know, horses eat for a few hours and then they rest. They're not permanently eating. And I think when they go out, like you're saying, in the spring, when there's loads of grass and they're, you know, like kind of gorging on what is new fresh fields or whatever, they're really overdoing it. They're like, oh my God, you know, it's been a bit ropey for a while. I'm going to go out and eat loads of grass. And they're full and fat because they've overdone it. You like if we ate a whole load of food, you know, the same as us. And so I think it's so important that this is spoken about in a very carefully nuanced way, because, yeah, horses do need, you know, live out time, absolutely. But I was even just discussing it with a client who took their young horse home. We had this lovely young horse with us for like 5 weeks, and he was out in a herd straight away when he came. You know, we did a bit of integration and then he went out in this herd, but he came in every day and he slept every day, multiple times. In the time when he came in, he slept, and they were in the field right behind the house, so I could see them quite often. And he was quite an active herd member. He was like moving the others around. He would kind of go off and they'd come with him. Even though he was the youngest, he was quite kind of, yeah, he was active. And I spoke to her and I said, when you bring him home, because he normally lives out 24 hours a day, you may want to integrate some time for sleep if he doesn't have a big barn to go into where the other horses will sleep with him, because I think it's that co-regulation around sleep that's so important for horses. It's not like that we see in our barn, because they all feel like the others are there when they're sleeping because they're right there. They often, it's very interesting actually, one will sleep, the other will stand with their head over the partition to be like, I'm here, you can sleep, I'll look after you. So that's my 2 pennies worth on that. I just thought it was a fascinating post.
I agree. I mean, I know Harley's individual routine. He's obviously lived at the place where I have now for like almost 3 years. And I know he comes in at like 8:30, he has breakfast, he eats some hay. If I come up between 9 and like 11, he will be asleep. And he'll be asleep in the same position, in the same place in the stable. It's just what he does. And then he'll wake up and he'll get lunchtime hay, and then he'll eat for a bit, and then he'll be like, okay, I'm ready to go in the field now. And then by 3 p.m, he'll be back out. But I was thinking, would I, you know, if I had money, no object, blah, 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 we had them at home, let's say I had 2 Irish drafts, for example, would I put them in stables during the day? Probably not. But would I try and make sure that there was a barn that was open? Yes. And if, I think to your point, if you're noticing that they're not lying down and they're not resting together for whatever reason, then maybe you intervene and go, okay, I'm just going to build in a couple of hours where you both come in and you have some time to yourself and you rest.
And I think it's actually quite rare that horses really get a species appropriate lifestyle. Like really species appropriate. You know, like we're talking like what wild horses would want, you know, herd turnout. And I don't mean 2, I mean like 5 or more. Yeah. And constant access to forage, constant access to movement, constant access to shelter that is A, comfortable, B, like this person was saying, not facing into the wind, that this is a dark corner of the field, big enough that multiple horses could go into it at one time. When we had field shelters at the old yard, they would often, like a lot of, like they'd all go in together They'd all go in the field shelter, and it wasn't big enough. It was what we had. But it's food for thought, isn't it? You know, I'm thinking, I wonder if I could put a field shelter in that field, and that could then be a you know, where we would then potentially have a track system. Could we then have a kind of barn type shelter that enabled lots of horses to be able to come in and out of it? It was like a through route as such. It's all of these sort of things, and I do think, unfortunately, on livery yard, they are falling short most of the time.
And it is very hard, and this is where I think we have to be practical. Like, if you know that your fields are really hot during the day, if you know that your horse is in a herd where they're not at the top of the pecking order, or they're quite active, or whatever it is, that's okay. Like, that's what you have to work with. And so you just build in a little bit of domestication or whatever by bringing them in. Like, that's okay. It's not like we don't all have access to 20 acres and, you know, the perfect environment. So we have to build in human elements to help them deal with the human elements that we've already set them up with.
Like I have done. I knew when I came here, I was never going to have big open barns that horses could come in and out of. It's just not the way the world works here. So I knew I needed to build a barn with stables that enable me to do the things I need to do, with horses that, you know, they can have the help from each other, but they can also have their own space. We had a new one arrive today, and he was quite stressed when he first came. He's come from like a retirement group. He's a young horse, but he was with just some older horses, and he hasn't really been in a stable very much. And so that's a bit of a, you know, shock to his system. And he came in, he was eating initially, and then I took another horse out of the barn to do some exercise, and he was really unsettled. And then one of the liveries said, I tell you what, your stables, Miriam, they are brilliant. And I said, oh, what made you say that? She's been here for ages. I was thinking, they're not new to you. Why do you think that? And she said, oh, the new pony, I saw that he was quite stressed when you took that one out for exercise. But then his neighbour Harold just put his head over, and now they're grooming. I'm like, what? Like, that's magic. And then he was just happy. And then he was just like, oh, cool, I've got a friend. I'm cool. I'm good. And he can touch two horses all at the same time. And they just hang out with each other. And actually, this is my last thing before I ask you how you've been and all of your updates. I've got an article in Horse and Hound.
Do you?
Horse and Hound Online. They asked me for an interview all about my horse first yard, and I can't believe it. Really, like, I read Horse and Hound as a child.
Mary.
How cool is that?
So
and I got
cool.
I got to say all the cool things, you know, like I got to say the things that are like burning passions of mine. Like,
do you know what? Shout out to Horse and Hound, because for a magazine that is seen as very traditional, with traditional ties, I have noticed that in recent years their editorial they have asked big questions. They have tried to push the envelope a little bit on forward-thinking stuff. Like, I think they're doing a nice job.
They were lovely. The person who interviewed me was so nice, and she was really like, my goodness, she's actually really local, interestingly. She was like, oh my God, I'd love to come and visit. This sounds amazing. And I'm like, yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is really special what I've created. And I read Horse and Hound all my life. You know, I remember when I was a kid and I got to get the subscription for it. You know, there was a time when you changed from Pony Magazine to Horse and Hound.
Yeah.
There was like an age.
I switched from Pony Mag to like Your Horse.
Okay.
I was a slightly different demographic. But yeah, I mean, they were in tack rooms.
Yeah.
If there wasn't a Horse and Hound in the tack room, like, you know, what was this place?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, really cool. So yeah, anyway, how have you been? How are things? How's Harley boy?
Oh, Harley's good. I just kind of wanted to use my time for this intro to talk about Quest and like how wonderful it is. So Quest is British dressage sort of grassroots campaign to get riders into like affiliated dressage, basically. So you can do it at intro, prelim, novice level, and you can wear whatever you want. You don't have to plait. Like, it's all very relaxed. And I didn't do it with Woody, and I didn't do it with Harley for a long time because I was like, oh, I'm just not good enough, affiliated, big deal, blah, blah, blah. This has been our first season doing Quest, and we're on track to go to our semi-finals. We're 8th in the leaderboard right now, and they take the top 12 through. And like, our average score is like, I want to say like 62%. We're not talking, you know, we're not reaching for the stars in terms of like 70 plus or whatever. But I'm really proud of us. And I just like, I can't stress how much I have enjoyed it and how much I recommend it to people. Like, the venues that I've gone to, so Parwood, Packersham, Felbridge, those are our kind of local ones, Speedgate. I don't think I've been in a class this season that's been bigger than like 6 riders. And on more than one occasion, I've been the only one doing my particular class, so like the over 21s. The venues are often very quiet, very friendly. The warm-ups are quiet. The horses can chill. And what's really nice is, like, not every test has been straightforward. There have been tests where Harley has reared up in front of the judge. There have been tests where he has run backwards, where he has jumped sideways, where I've had to do a circle and start again. Like, you know, you can, you know, imagine it. And the judges are so encouraging. Like, every single time that test sheet is marked fairly, but the comments are always like, lots to like, da-da-da-da, keep going. Like, they're really encouraging. And I just, if you're thinking about doing dressage and you kind of want to do something that feels like you're working towards something, I would 100% give Quest a go. It's been so fun. And I'm like hooked now. Like, I'm invested. I really want to go to the semi-finals.
Will Rhi get to the semi-finals? Tune in for the next episode of This Equestrian Life to find out.
Yeah, exactly. We've got till the end of August, guys. So unless somebody else has a really good August on my like leaderboard for our local venue, we should get in. Even if we just, you know, go there and have a test and we don't get in the top whatever, I don't really care. I just think it's really fun.
Oh, I just love that. I love that you're kind of, just remembering that like that fun bit. Competition is fun. Like, I remember I went to a really non-competitive school, and so then horse sport was like, yeah, let me go up against somebody. And I think when you can do that in a really encouraging way like that, that can be lovely.
Agreed. It's nice for the horses too as well, and it's just like a very low-key, very easy way to get into the sport. So yeah.
Are you going to go to the Associated Champs?
Yes. Yeah, we've qualified, we've submitted. So the Associated Champs is another BD thing, and it's lots of different classes that are designed for sort of non-traditional BD horses. So there's a draft one. You can have pure drafts and part drafts. There's like cob, there's veteran, there's side saddle, there's lots of others, other breeds. I think some of the native breeds have their own classes. And you only have to get, I say only, but you only have to get 4 scores over 60% to qualify. And it's in Addington, which isn't, you know, miles and miles from us.
That's really close. I'm going to come.
Yeah, it's on Halloween. So we're going to go up there. I'm waiting for the class to open, but we've qualified. So we're just going to go and we're just going to make it fun. Like, I don't really care what happens. I just want to go and be like, oh yeah, our first championship. And like, we did it and it was fun.
I will definitely come, and I'll help you in the warm-up. Remind you to do your leg yield.
Yeah. You can have a little headset.
Yeah, we can do headsets, yeah.
Be really profesh.
Yeah.
No, it should be fun. I'm excited. And it's on the Saturday, so that's good because it means that it's easy around work. Yeah, it's good.
I'm so excited about this episode. We're going to be joined by Ellen from Simple Systems, and I think it's going to be a very unsales pitchy kind of conversation. I'm pretty sure that we're going to be talking about nutrition in a broad sense and species appropriate diets, gut health, all of the things that I am like so passionate about. So you're going to have to tell me to shut up every now and then if I talk too much. But I'm really looking forward to it. Are you looking forward to it?
Yeah, 100%. And we know from, obviously, we were able to look at the podcast data, and we know that you really enjoyed hearing about feed previously. And I still feel like I'm someone who feeds quite a simple, but still quite a traditional diet to my horse. So Harley gets a little bit of chaff, a little bit of nuts, and then, you know, ad lib forage and haylage and hay and whatever. And then he gets his Feed Mark bespoke supplement. And so even though it's really simple, actually, I know that we're moving towards conversations around even simpler feed. So you eat, whether you're on Miri's side of the spectrum where you're already exploring, like, what's it called when you feed straights? Is that the phrase?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah. Or you're like me, where you're like, you still feed a pretty basic feed, but it's, you know, traditional. Should be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. This episode is sponsored by Westgate Labs. One of the things we really admire about Westgate is that they're not just passionate about horse health, they're passionate about protecting the environment too. Their approach to parasite control is all about testing first, helping horse owners avoid unnecessary worm treatment while still keeping horses healthy. That means making informed decisions based on evidence rather than guesswork. Sustainability runs through everything they do. Westgate has replaced traditional polystyrene sample pots with compostable alternatives, introduced zero-waste packaging, and they are also custodians of Fen Lech Nature Reserve, a 135-acre rewilding project that's creating an incredible haven for wildlife and biodiversity. Their purpose-built laboratory has over 26 years of experience delivering accurate parasite testing that thousands of horse owners trust every year. Ordering is simple. Buy your test online, send your sample through the post, and you'll receive clear results alongside expert support whenever you need it. If you're looking for a more sustainable, science-led approach to parasite control, visit westgatelabs.co.uk and use the code EQLIFE10 for 10% off your order, which is excluding Equisal and subscriptions. That's EQLIFE10 for 10% off your order. Back to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Ellen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Very kind of you.
Well, we are very interested in this topic. We had a previous episode where we talked around nutrition and it did really well. And people were really, really interested in this. And I think it's because everybody has to feed their horse. So you can't get away from this conversation, really. And there's a lot of interesting, diverse advice out there. Some of it less helpful, some of it quite marketing driven, and it can be hard to find your way, right? So that's why we thought we would like to have this conversation with you, who I believe will have a very species appropriate direction when it comes to the feeding advice that you give. But let's start with you, Ellen, yourself. Can you tell us a bit about yourself? How did you get into what you do? What do you do?
Yeah, no, very much. So I am the nutrition manager for Simple System Horse Feeds. I've been at the company nearly 6 years now. Started off just on the general feed advice line, and then through sort of personal development took on the role as nutrition manager now. So I oversee a lot of obviously the general day-to-day feed advice line bits that we do by phone and by email. I also oversee the forage analysis side of things, which is really interesting. So hay testing, haylage testing, grass testing, which can be really interesting. But how I sort of got into horses and even got to this position, it's certainly not a career I ever saw myself in. I just wanted to play with ponies, in all honesty, and ended up with a very serious job. But it's been challenging and rewarding in sort of equal measure, just a little bit different to what I thought. I certainly didn't grow up horsey. My best friend at school was a farmer's daughter, so she had a pony, and I must have nagged my parents in some way. They're not horsey at all, but they bought me a riding lesson for my 9th birthday, and I've probably ridden every week since. So it's been quite a journey to come from a non-horsey background, but it's perhaps made me work a little bit harder to get there, because nothing's ever come easy, and I've had to get it for myself, as it were. I didn't own my first horse till I was in my 20s, and now I did have 3, and now I've just got the 2. So it's been a bit of a journey. But how I actually got into nutrition, like I say, I generally worked with horses. So I've worked in most disciplines, most yards, started at riding schools, rescue centres, worked a bit in racing, dressage, eventing, you name it, I've probably done it. And then I had a stint at an equine hospital, so on the more clinical side of things, which has really set me up for then this role, because when you deal with the very worst colics, the very worst laminitis, the very worst of the worst as such, people's kind of day-to-day problems are actually quite easy to deal with in some regard. So that set me up then really nicely for a bit of a change away from physically working with horses and doing a bit more behind the scenes role, as it were.
Well, first of all, God bless the riding school ponies, because
I know.
They really are the best, aren't they? I know we talk about this, but I'm the same as you. I think I had my first lesson when I was like 7 or 9-ish, and I couldn't afford my first horse until I was in my 20s either. Yeah. And the riding schools are just a huge part of how people get there. I have so many questions about, what you've trained in and your education, but I wanted to just touch on the hospital element of it, because was there anything in what you were seeing come through the doors that made you think about nutrition and that being interesting for you, or was it just like coincidental that you went from that to what you do now?
So it was actually COVID and the whole pandemic thing that led to my change of career. I was furloughed from my role at the Equine Vet Hospital, and going from 16-hour days to spending 3 months at home with my own horses and dogs, I realised it might be quite nice to have a slightly better work-life balance, shall we say. I absolutely adored the role, but it just wasn't sustainable for me long term. I'd already done it for about 2 years, and I just needed more time at home ultimately. So I looked at what was out there. I was in no rush to change, but this came up, and I thought, you know what, I've always been slightly interested in nutrition. It was my strongest subject, shall we say, at uni, so it was always in the back of my mind, maybe that's something I could explore down the line. And like you say, little bits here and there through the time at the vet hospital had kind of piqued my interest. We weren't allowed to specialise, we kind of worked around the whole place, but I did a lot in ICU, so I did work with a lot of those colic cases with the grass sickness cases, and just did find that interesting, the whole refeeding thing. And it's so critical in that situation that you're feeding correctly, because it's for them to be able to recover and ultimately survive at the end of the day. So it was definitely interesting to see it from that clinical perspective, and then how we can apply that to day-to-day management as well as anything else.
Yeah.
What did you study at university?
So uni-wise, I did a bachelor's degree in equitation and coaching, so more down the horse and rider development side of things, sports psychology, training programs, things like that. We did touch a bit on nutrition and the physiological side of things, but it was more from a sports performance basis. And then whilst I was in my current role, I've then got a master's in equine science, so just delving a little bit deeper into those finer details around breeding, again, nutrition, performance, biomechanics, bits and pieces like that. So a well-rounded background rather than anything too specialist, really, which I think is actually really important in this role.
So what I'm hearing is that you have a very broad spectrum knowledge around your equine degree and your master's. It wasn't necessarily a very, a completely specific nutrition-based education, and that's what has enabled you to do the job that you're doing today.
It's not really something that's available. If it was, you would probably do it, but actually I think if anything, you don't want to specialise, because my knowledge from other areas of equestrianism in general makes me a better nutritionist, because you need to understand when people come to you with a riding issue or a competition related issue or a management issue. If you only know nutrition but don't know how a horse moves, lives, breathes, the basics of it, you can't give as good advice in some ways, I don't think.
So thinking about how people think about feed, before we dive into customer queries, I kind of want to know where your opinion sits on what we feed, because there is a bit of a spectrum that Miri and I were touching on before you joined us, which is you've got owners like me, maybe on one end of the spectrums, who feed maybe traditional stuff. So I feed bit of chaff, bit of nuts, ad lib hay, and then he has a bespoke all-in-one supplement from Feedmark. And then on the other end of the spectrum, so you're try and keep it simple, but you're feeding traditional feed essentially. And then you've got people like Miri on the other end of the spectrum who are exploring kind of single ingredient stuff and feeding straights and looking at everything through a very different lens. On that spectrum, where do you sit now, and has that changed over time?
Yeah, I think, like you say, the feed industry has massively evolved and is always evolving. And like you say, there is an option for every owner, every horse, and what they want to feed. A lot of, say, feed training and, qualification related is still very traditional. The BHS or Pony Club rules of feeding are still taught, and, it's very much cereal based this, and that's how we go about it. We feed those convenient kind of bagged options because they're now available. They weren't available 50, 60 years ago. We fed straights because that was all there was. And then it evolved into these kind of pre-mixed cereals, pellets, balancers. And now I feel we're kind of going back, but in a good way. We're not going back to the previous straight cereal feeding, but we're going back to straight forage feeding in many regards, and certainly placing that extra emphasis on forage first. I don't know when it happened, but we seem to forget that hay and grass should actually be the most important thing you feed your horse, and anything else you feed on top is only because you have to, either for a specialist need, because the hay or the grass isn't nutritious enough to support their workload, their body condition, or the time of year. Even we live in a very strange climate at the minute where it's doing weird and wonderful things to the grass, and a lot of horses are going to need more than that, or new management means they just don't get enough of it in their natural daily life. So we are having to supplement with feed, but we can hopefully, like you say, it's a really nice phrase to use, go down the species appropriate route, and that perhaps some of those easy to choose options, they're convenient, but are they the most species appropriate in the ingredients they're using at the end of the day?
This really reminds me, we had a lovely lady called Rena who came on the podcast from Knepp. Have you heard of Knepp? It's this amazing estate down in Surrey where they've rewilded 3,000 acres. And they have this huge herd of ponies. I say huge, it's not that huge, but they are behaving as one of the large herbivores in this rewilded space. And one of the things that she said is, horses, of course, have evolved, right? They have evolved from their ancestors of the Przewalski ponies, right? Their digestive system has not really evolved. They are still hindgut fermenters. And when we feed this modern way, and I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on where you think that comes from, as in why that started happening. I have my own thoughts on this, but we've started feeding these horses in a way that isn't designed for their bodies, and that is often where we then see lots of the problems that we see. But what I mean by that is, like, we used to, like you say, used to feed straights. Now it's more commonly fed like a complete feed that kind of does everything it says on the bag. But it's got lots of ingredients. It's quite complicated, starchy, sugary, all of these different things. Why did that happen? Why did the system change?
I think it was almost because, like, what's the word for it? Kind of like processing methods improved, so they were able to make these feeds. There were advances in milling capabilities and, what machinery could do, and it was almost like an exploration and a carry on from that, in that we can do this, so why not? And then it made use of, kind of waste or byproducts from other areas of certainly the human food industry. It gave them a value and a use. There was kind of a talk about it being circular in some sense, in historic sense, so that horses carried cereals or straw in from the field, and then what couldn't be used to humans, they gave back to the horses. So the horses were almost bringing in their own food, and there wasn't the, mileage or, effort from humans. It was already, the horses were doing it for themselves in that sense, and nothing was being wasted from that process. And I think there's a level of, in our own food, or just convenience eating. You got to think back however many years, you would have a home cooked meal. You wouldn't go and buy a ready meal or chips that, just went straight in the oven, and pizza, and, it's all that kind of takeaway culture and things. It's fast food, and it's ultimately trickled into horse feed, I think, unfortunately, with where we're going with it.
You said something really interesting earlier, which I think on the face of it, you think, well, isn't that obvious? But I feel like there's an answer underneath it. So you said, actually, it's hay and grass that are the most important things that we should be feeding our horses and thinking about. And on the surface, you hear that and you think, well, yeah, that's a given. Like, my horse has grass, my horse has hay, tick, tick, tick. Now I have all these other choices for my, my feed, hard feed or whatever. But you also mentioned earlier about part of your job being grass testing and hay testing. So when you think about what you said there, can you unpack the complexity of that? Because it feels simple, but I feel like it's not.
Yeah, I think, like you say, a lot of people think it is a given that you just feed hay and grass, but perhaps because of our training through the Pony Club before the BHS, we were taught that it wasn't enough. Perhaps you were always taught that split of, if you had a horse in hard work, they needed 50% hay and 50% hard feed, and that just kind of became normal. I think, like you say, it's a habit that everybody picked up. It was passed down generation to generation to generation, and we just kept doing it and never really questioned it, because it was clearly, it was working to a certain extent. And yes, it will work for a lot of horses, but I think with now advances in our own understanding, with veterinary, advances, we know that it doesn't suit all horses, and that has just led people to start asking those questions of, my horse isn't suiting this, so what else is out there? And I think that's, having a nice direction in the feed industry, that some of us are branching off into that more natural way of feeding, because there are horses that aren't suiting the conventional feeding.
And what are the sort of things that you might see if a horse wasn't suiting the conventional route?
Yeah, so we get a lot of horses nowadays with allergies. I don't know if allergy testing has got better. We've stopped saying a horse is itchy and actually decided it might be, because something is triggering it. So that is, a main reason people will come to us, because they do need a diet that is free from things their horses actually cannot eat. They are intolerant to them from, a skin perspective. We obviously then get kind of the behavioural side of things, that some horses do just find those quicker release starches, sugars, bits and pieces like that, they do just find them too heating, and the owners want a more controllable, level-headed horse with, appropriate energy when they want it, but not this, kind of massive hot moment when you first get on board and then they drop off afterwards. And then also, obviously, we go into kind of the more clinical side of things, where horses can't cope from, say, a digestive perspective. I think we're getting a lot better at, understanding, like, say, hindgut issues, because horses are, like you say, hindgut fermenters, and if you're not necessarily putting the right fibre or forage in the hindgut for them to break down, those more sensitive horses will start to struggle, and that's where they need to go back to that kind of forage first diet. And I think we're getting better at recognising that as well.
Could you go into a little bit more detail about how a horse's digestive system works? Because I do think this is kind of knowledge that maybe we don't know about. And so then we're like, okay, someone's saying that their forage, they hindgut fermenters, so I need to feed them forage. But how does that actually work? Because I think that would be helpful for people to understand.
Yeah, the horse's digestive system, like I say, is really complex, and there's a lot of things that a lot of owners that get into horses just through either through family or, you know, because they have horses readily available, they won't necessarily do training, like say in digestive physiology and how a horse does, you know, digest and eat, and it is complex. So obviously it starts kind of in the stomach primarily. Obviously they do eat and chew. The interesting thing actually about horses chewing is their saliva doesn't contain any enzymes, so they don't start breaking down starch when they're chewing like we do. If you chew bread, it starts to go sweet because you've got amylase in your saliva that is breaking down these starches, whereas obviously a horse doesn't possess those. So starch digestion doesn't start until the stomach. It doesn't have that sort of pre-digestion of starch. So starch only starts being digested, like I say, in the stomach by obviously then gastric enzymes there, by your, you know, gastric juices, your acids, biles, things like that start to break those down. That's where you've got your primary, you know, ultimately that is where starch is digested. So that's where we go back to that age-old rule of feeding little and often. The horse's stomach is very small in comparative to its size. It's about the size of a rugby ball, even in a big horse. So you think of big horse, tiny stomach, there's not a lot of volume and capacity there, and it will empty when it gets to about 2/3 full, so it never gets entirely full anyway. So if you're overloading it, stuff will just pass on because it's reached capacity. And if you've not fully digested that starch, that's where you then get those hindgut issues, because starch, when it digests, it does become acidic. It will lower pH because that is by its nature what it does. So if your starch is passing through undigested and reaches the hindgut, lowers pH there, that then really upsets the microbes, which I'll obviously come on to a minute, because the hindgut is another kind of whole kettle of fish in itself. But yeah, so the stomach, obviously, then you've got the acid portions, and that's where obviously there's all the talk about gastric ulcers. There's a portion that's obviously protected from acid in theory because it should be there, so the lining is lined with a protective coating, but in the upper portion you've not got that. So then if you're not filling it with fibre to sort of damp that acid on top, is where you start to get acid splash issues. And obviously gastric ulcers can be caused by all manner of things. It can be, you know, stress related, pain related, feed related, but there's lots of things we can learn in how a horse's stomach should be under normal conditions, i.e. with this constant little trickle of small pieces of chewed up fibre, and what that would do to the acid in the stomach compared to just filling it with, you know, little cereal based pellets or little bits of mix or something. It creates an entirely different, you know, look and feel to it. Quite a good way of visualizing it is if you do get a bucket of water and put a handful of mix in it compared to putting a handful of chop in it, how that looks gives you a bit of a visualization of what is happening in the horse's stomach. And then if you're sort of sloshing it around, you can see what happens to the acid in the stomach and how you can get those acid splash kind of related ulcers if you're not filling the stomach with the right things ultimately. So after the stomach, obviously, like I say, we've got that breakdown of starch. You start to get some breakdown of sugar, breakdown of some proteins, and you start getting little bits of absorption as it then passes from the stomach into the small intestine. So your vitamins, minerals, proteins broken down into amino acids, things like that all start to be absorbed, obviously taken into the blood, taken around the body. And then we get to, obviously, in the horse, the main site of digestion. It sounds like a lot has happened already, but actually the main site of digestion is the horse's hindgut, and that is home to, I mean, trillions of little microorganisms, bacteria, good and bad guys. We obviously hope there's more good guys than bad guys, but that's where you can get problems. And they are obviously all there as, like you say, that fermentation vat, and they are breaking down fibre through fermentation. And that is where you get that slow breakdown of fibre into volatile fatty acids, which are the horses, in many ways, or should be the horse's main energy substrate. It's a slowly released energy. It's better for their muscle support. It doesn't produce the same acidic conditions. It doesn't produce the same amount of lactic acid, so it's better for kind of the working horse in that sense. But it's also slower release from a metabolic point of view. We're, you know, releasing nutrients to the horse over a more sustained period of time than really hitting their system with loads of things and needing that greater insulin response or spike after digestion. And in the hindgut, obviously, with this fibre digestion, that's where you're getting, like I say, your main energy substrate, proteins, bits and pieces. But it's here where we really want to feed the hindgut microbes as much as we want to feed the horse. They are a living organism in their own entity. So as much as the horse needs fibre and protein for their own nourishment, the gut microbes need feeding as well. So that's where it's really good when you're using things like forages, because they're interestingly, their protein digestibility is different to that of cereals. So cereals have a higher protein digestibility, so they give the horse more, but there's less left over to feed the gut bugs. Whereas with forages, the protein digestibility is closer to around 50%. So your horse is still getting a good level of protein, but what is left is then feeding the gut bugs. And ultimately, if you have a happier, healthier, stronger, more diverse hindgut, you're hopefully going to in turn have a happier, healthier, stronger horse in many ways. So it does all kind of tie in with that. They need to be healthy to support their host.
So with that system in mind, what are the things that modern feed, in a nutshell, well, maybe some specific examples, gets wrong? And then what are the potential solutions, either something that Simple Systems is doing or as a broader case? Like, what are the challenges and how is it being solved in a modern world for that very traditional environment?
Yeah, of course. I think, like you say, the biggest thing is, modern management is that we often take horses away from being able to eat regularly. Whatever feeding system you're on, they should be trickle feeding, because that is by their nature. Like I said, with the stomach kind of constantly filling but constantly emptying, it needs to be constantly filling at the same time. Otherwise, you're putting no acid buffer in. So obviously they only produce saliva when they're chewing, which helps to dilute stomach acid, but they're also only producing kind of acid buffer in the stomach in response to feed intake. So if you're not putting feed in there, you're not buffering acid. And that's where, after an hour, they say a horse will start to feel hungry. After 2 hours, they start to feel discomfort because of the acid build up. And then if you're going sort of 4 hours or more without putting food in there, you really are massively increasing their risk of gastric ulcers.
I just think it's an important thing to mention as well, is a little reminder to everybody that horses don't have a gallbladder. So they just constantly produce acid, is what Ellen's saying, yes, rather than like only producing it like we do. We only produce acid when we eat. Yeah. So horses don't. They just do it all the time. Bit of a design flaw when it comes to modern keeping of horses.
Either a design flaw or mismanagement, depending on how you look at it in some
Definitely
ways.
The second one. But anyway, moving on. So I guess the second part of Rhi's question was, what can we do about it? What can we be feeding our horses?
Yeah, exactly that. So it does go back to that, how can you manage your horse in a way that the majority of the time they always have something to eat? And I appreciate for the owners of good doers, that's terrifying, because, you're told by the vet you need to restrict them to X amount of kilos a day. They can only go out for so many hours a day. And it is a challenge to manage, good doers. I think horses, either through management or feed or perhaps grazing quality, they seem to be getting better doers. We have more people struggling at that end of the spectrum with overweight horses than they do underweight ones. And it's how you can get creative to ensure that constant flow of fibre, of forage. And like say, it's not always easy, but it could take a bit of creativity. There's a lot of things you can do, even just to extend eating time. It sounds a really simple one, but I often say a lot of horses will finish what you give them, be it a net or a bowl. They will stand and finish it until it's gone, and then they will have a snooze. So if you split what you're giving them into 2 nets, 2 bowls, 3 nets, 3 bowls, however many you've got available, however many you can be bothered to lug around and carry about, you're encouraging them to take those breaks between feeding bouts, because they would take breaks in the wild. They don't eat for 16 hours and then sleep. They will eat for a bit, snooze for a bit, play for a bit, eat for a bit, and it's kind of that constant through the day. So if you can kind of encourage that pattern of behaviour with 3 1 kilo nets instead of 1 3 kilo net, you're encouraging that break. You're asking your horse to take a pause and giving them that kind of more natural foraging opportunity as well. I think that's the other thing of it, kind of the mental enrichment side of things, is that we've put them into a very strict routine of you get feed at this time, you get hay at this time, you get turn out at this time, and that doesn't always fit with when a horse might want to eat.
This is very much like case study of one, but we've talked about it, I think, with other guests actually. So I have an Irish Draft. He's 8 years old. He lives out during the night and in during the day. He doesn't have hay nets. He just has hay on the floor and a hard feed in the morning, and he has ad lib hay. And I have never felt like, and actually we've had him scored every year because we do camp with the BHS and they're lovely and they always get us scored. And he's always been, I think, 0.5 over, but they always say he's 0.5 over up here, but he's 0.5 under down here, so it will eventually level out. And when I was talking to someone about it, they said that there is an anxiety with good doers sometimes, where they are given hay nets periodically because they worry about the feed running out. They end up eating more quickly because they're like, have to eat while it's here. And that actually, if a horse has access to hay all the time or forage all the time, eventually they will actually slow down. And to your point, there are days when he'll have half his breakfast and then he'll have a sleep and then he'll come back to it later because he knows it's never going away, the hay's never going away. Do you think that is, I'm just really lucky that my horse is like that? Or do you think that is something that actually is a thing? Like if we gave ad-lib forage, they would stop eating and eating and eating and eating eventually. Is that helpful for owners to know?
I think you've touched on a brilliant point there, in that I think we do create a lot of anxiety in our horses around feed. And you would know yourself, if you had, if you were starving, you would eat what you got when it was given to you and then just sit and wait for the next meal. And I think we do create that in our horses a bit by over restricting them. And also with over restricting, you do place the body into a state of stress. So if you are over restricting or starving, they will naturally slow metabolic rate. They will make more of what they do get. They will become more energy efficient because they know naturally they're not getting as much in their natural diet. And I think there was a case study, I want to say, I don't know that it was like research published, but it was perhaps in a magazine, that someone had been on not sort of similar journey to you, but she had a horse that she felt wasn't suiting really restricted management. She's like, this isn't working for me, it's not working for my horse, I'm just going to ad-lib him and see what happens. And it changed his life, as it were. Like you say, it took a little while, he was stuffing his face, but then eventually he slowed down and learned to self-regulate. His body relaxed and he was able to maintain much healthier body condition, being fed in theory more, because like you say, he'd gone back to that pattern of self-regulation, only taking what he needed when he needed it, rather than stress eating through everything really quickly and creating problems internally for him. Even at a cellular level, his cells relax, they metabolize better. So
I think it's important to maybe mention at that moment that it's it's a very with caution. If you've got a laminitic pony that's got MS and all these things, I feel like I just have to say it, because I was thinking, yes, I have seen this number of times, exactly what you're talking about. Horses that struggle with gorging and really overeating really often comes from a place of deprivation rather than a place of, abundance. But you do have to be a little bit careful, because you obviously have to be a bit, don't just take their grazing muzzle off and hope for the best, that's not the right thing, either. You spoke very eloquently, by the way, Ellen, about the internal digestive system. And one of the things that you spoke about that I am very, very interested in is the diversity of the gut flora. And as an anxious human, I have learnt the importance of my gut diversity and my mental health, and the importance of having diverse plant diet as such, as in that the plants I eat are very diverse, and that has enabled my gut to be really healthy, and so then my brain is better, because there is a huge link between your gut and your brain. Your gut also produces serotonin. Now, I don't know if this is something to do the same as horses. I don't know if there's anyone that's ever studied this. But is this relevant, that we're thinking about feeding the gut a really diverse range of plants, and it helps with our regulation, our mental capacity?
Absolutely. So you've hit the nail on the head, exactly. And it's where, like you say, human nutrition doesn't normally tie that directly into horse nutrition, but in many ways in that regard it does. We are learning more and more about the importance of, like say, feeding the horse's hindgut, and that, like you say, with that diversity in microbes, the horse is healthier in a general health sense, a digestive sense, but also, like say, those ties into cognition and brain function. They've done some great studies in youngsters that found they were, better handleability, they were more inquisitive and braver, but, not sharper. They were just nicer people to be around, fed that forage-based diet as opposed to something cereal-based. And it does all tie into that, like you say, feeding forage first, but again, it's really important to, like say, feed that diverse forage mix. Horses in the wild, if, like say, we go back to where they came from, wouldn't have just eaten one single grass type in the field and that was all they ate. There would have been, like say, a diverse mix of grasses, but they'd have also nibbled on bushes that were available, and herbs and plants and bits and pieces. And we're learning more and more that if you can create that strong diverse ecosystem in the hindgut, it does tie into the horse's own health as well in numerous ways.
And is that something that we can do by feeding them something? Because for obviously a lot of people, they're not in control of the grass, they're not in control of the hay. They have the hay provided to them by the yard, and they're actually not even often allowed to buy any in, because yards have rules on things like that. Are we able, and I think I know the answer because I feed simple systems, but are we able to add things into the diet? Like, can people go out there and do better for their horse by buying a bag of feed? You know, can they do that?
And you don't even have to go that far. Like you say, it's great if you are happy to, like say, readdress your feeding system, look at different ways of foraging. Like say, you can introduce different forage types through the chop, the pellet, the bricks that we do at Simple System. But also if you're happy with your horse's feed, but you do again want to do better for them with enrichment, I say one of the easiest things you can do is take them for a walk and let them eat somewhere else. It's as simple as, take them out of the field and don't, exercise them to ride them, exercise them to give them something else to eat. And that might be, you've got a nice driveway or track down to the yard, or that there's a bridleway that's off road that has got some hawthorn and blackberry and rose bushes, and you can take your horse there and let them eat, ride them there and let them eat, take your lunch and let them have lunch at the same time. It's a really fun thing to do. It's a bonding exercise. You can do it, in hand ridden. You don't have to have a horse that can be ridden to do it. Like I say, literally go for an in-hand walk, let them eat other things, because like I say, a lot of people don't have the ability to reseed with a diverse grass mix, buy a lovely meadow hay from an organic farmer. It's not feasible for a lot of people, and a lot of people are on livery yards where the fields are forward sides of electric tape. There's not a tree or a bush or a hedge in sight, and the horses can only eat the grass that's given to them, the hay that's given to them. But if you can get creative in different ways, you can increase that diversity at relatively low cost. Going for a walk and snacking on a bridleway would be free. It's just going to take half an hour of your time, an hour of your time, but the mental enrichment, the nutritional diversity it's going to give your horse is really beneficial.
We did that literally yesterday. We were out eating blackberries, which have come out early this year, I feel like. Normally they're
very stressed,
but very funny
early.
watching how they eat the blackberries as well, if they know how to do it. And then watching what they choose. So we had some blackberries, and then he moved to another patch and he went straight for the thistles. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And I was trying to remember what the thistles do. But, it's even fun then, because you're stood on your phone going, why would a horse choose this over this? And, it's really funny. It's good. It is fun.
They're very good at knowing what they need as well. Like I say, it's interesting to watch them self-select those different things. When I had my 3, they would all pick different things at different times of year, and I had one that liked the purple top thistles, one that liked the yellow top thistles, and taste, health benefit, don't know, but it's really interesting to give them that freedom of choice as well, because again, a lot of what we do with our horses, we prescribe it. We don't give them free choice to do things like that. So actually allowing them half an hour where all you have to do for this half an hour is eat what you want, and I'm going to stand and watch it and Google the plants you're eating and check it's something safe, is a really nice exercise for both of you, really.
You mentioned something then when you said about the blackberries. You mentioned, Ellen, that they are early this year. And we've talked a lot about the climate change in this season, because we haven't not been able to. We've been recording all through the summer. It's, can't not talk about it. You mentioned that it's because the plants are stressed. And I wondered if you could touch on the impact of stressed grass on our horses. And I think that's the end of that sentence. What we're seeing, and if by feeding a more diverse, more species appropriate diet, are we supporting our horses better through these climate changes that we're seeing?
Yeah, can we do anything about it? Because to your point, a lot of people can't control their grass. You have what you have.
And you can't control the weather. That's the other factor as well. We're all at the mercy of it, unfortunately. Like I say, stressed grass is a real problem for, even, your average horse, not just your laminitic horse or your poor doer. The problem with stressed grass is, obviously, grass again is a living thing. It wants to live and survive, so it will do what it can to survive. And what it does in a drought is it basically stores sugar, because sugar is quite protective for grass. But the problem is it's making all this sugar to, like say, try and keep itself alive, but also because it's still sunny, it's still photosynthesizing to a certain extent and creating sugar, but because there's not the moisture in the ground, it can't grow. So stressed grass is just sat there really sugary, almost like in the starting blocks, waiting for a bit of moisture so that it can grow, because it wants to do its damnedest to survive and live when the right conditions are there. So the problem we see in drought years like this is that there's grass in the field. A lot of horses are still picking about and eating something, even though to our eye there's nothing there. The problem is what they're eating is very sugary and probably also very low in protein. So what we tend to see is good doers do really well on seemingly nothing because they turn the sugar into fat and metabolize it really well and, you know, keep condition. The poor doers, because there's not the protein there to sustain muscle mass, they really struggle and lose condition. So we get this real divide in good doers that just keep doing better and better, and poor doers that the weight's just falling off them. And normally this time of year, you know, they should be at their fattest, really. They should be going into the winter in, you know, a good place. So we have a lot of owners really concerned in these extreme kind of weather models, because you do get that split and divide between managing your good doers and managing your poor doers. And it's where a forage based feeding system does obviously really help you, because you can replace what isn't there. So something like our blue bag grass pellets is grown to a stage of kind of mid maturity, so it is like summer grazing in a bag. So if you've got no summer grazing in your field, you can directly feed a feed that is going to give them the nutritional merit of that grass, but in a bagged format when you've not got it naturally available. Or like you say, the diversity is gone because, you know, certain grass types have really struggled. You can introduce it through feeding other forage types. So sandfoin or something like that is a really nice one to add in, because of its mineral richness at these times of year as well. Obviously the grass is basically just sugar. It hasn't got, you know, any nutritional value to it, you know, mineral and protein, and vitamins will be really low. So anything you can do to increase those nutrient sources, yes, is only going to benefit your horse. You're doing it in a more digestive friendly way, and a way that they know how to make use of what you're giving them. A traditional kind of fibre pellet made from cereals, okay, great, it's topping up fibre and giving them bulk, but it's not giving them the same nutritional value that they really need to thrive at this time of year.
I feel like simple systems also do something which I feed a couple of different feeds from you guys, but one of them is the mixed meadow pellets, which I'm really interested by. And I was listening to a vet talk about it, Lily Wilson. We've had her on the podcast before. She's a nurturing nature equine. She runs a track system, but she's a vet and she does all this amazing rehab. And one of the things that she was talking about was feeding this like they're old grasses. So they are not modern. So they're not like a ryegrass. Now I don't think ryegrass is new, but it's been formatted to be really high in certain things so that it's good for cows. And I think this is an important maybe point to touch on. And what the mixed meadow pellets is very old grass that's very like, meaning that you get this good diversity. But can you talk a bit about this old grass and new grass thing?
Yeah, of course. Like I say, ryegrass is a really good one to touch on, in that it's basically been doctored by humans to be more nutritious, not necessarily to the extent of being genetically modified, but we have just encouraged it to grow in a certain way so that, like say, it produces more sugar, it produces more protein, so that farmers basically have a more economic thing to fatten their cattle on, because they want to be able to just turn them out on good grass and get the growth gains that they want without having to put the money into, you know, concentrate feeding for them. And the problem we then get with horses is it is just, you know, it's too highly nutritious. If you had probably the first ever, you know, ryegrass, it was probably fine because it was probably a normal grass you'd find in a diverse mix. But how we've doctored it and the ryegrasses we have today, they are just far too nutritious. But like say, if you go back to those more historic, what we would think of, you know, meadow grasses, so timothy grass, cocksfoot, your tall fescues, every version of fescue that you can get, you know, that they are, you know, much more traditionally better suited to horses, because they will still produce, they can still be high protein if you cut them at certain stages, but generally the sugar levels are low, so they are just that bit more appropriate. And like you say, you touched on with our meadow forage pellets, they have sandfoin at their base, and sandfoin, like you say, is a really historically used legume forage. It goes back into kind of the previous use of horses, and that farmers grew sainfoin to feed to horses because it was an economic thing to feed them, but nutritious enough to sustain their work. And then when we stopped using horses on the land and tractors took over, we stopped growing sainfoin because then we had no one to feed it to. But I think we're realising that nutritionally it's a really good forage type for horses because you get that really nice balance of high protein but low sugar. It's a nice mineral rich forage because it's much deeper rooting, so if you can get it established in a drought year it can do really well because it can obviously access more moisture from the soil as well. It's one that has really good environmental benefits. Part of the reason it's kind of coming back in is because they realised how good it was for bees and for pollinators, so they started growing it for the pollination side of things and doing research at it, and then someone kind of went, we used to feed this, why aren't we feeding it again? You know, if you're growing it for bees, well, crop it and harvest it and feed it to a horse. So we were very unique in bringing it to the market in, you know, a straight sense, and I think we are still to date the only feed company that have it as a straight forage type. It is slowly trickling into other inclusions, but at, you know, very low rate. If you do want a pure sainfoin, we're sort of the only people that are really champion it and like I say, trying to bring it back because it's a really beneficial forage type, but it's little known because it was used 50, 60 plus years ago and people kind of forgot about it. As you do, you fall into these new habits, like we said, and it's nice to kind of try and bring that back, really.
Before I ask my question, can you please spell sainfoin for our audio listeners who may want to Google this afterwards?
Yes. So it's sainfoin. So it looks like, sainfoin almost.
Perfect. Thank you. Because I know I, for one, was like, I'm going to Google this after, and then I was like, what am I Googling again? What's the word? So with all of the knowledge that you have, you said you have 2 horses now. Can you tell us a bit about them? What's their breeding? Are they good doers, poor doers? And what do they eat?
Yeah, of course. So I have a rescue horse from Red Wings Horse Sanctuary. He is called Indigo, and he is a Hackney cross, we think, thoroughbred. I got him with a bit of a history. He'd been written off as being a problem child. No one wanted him. We were kind of his last resort. I took him on as an unbroken 6-year-old. He's now nearly 10 and one of the best horses I think I will ever own. I absolutely love him. He's got a heart of gold, incredibly clever, too clever, challenges me in ways I didn't know I could be challenged. But yeah, he's been a massive learning curve for me. And then I've got his companion pony, basically. She was my partner's pony that I've now kind of taken over ownership of, and she's just a little coloured Welsh cross. Never been ridden. She's 16 now, I think, but we do a bit of in-hand showing with her. And Indigo will be a competition horse when he decides he can travel, but that's a work in progress. But yeah, he's my main sort of riding horse. And Indigo was always a very poor doer. He's quite an interesting case in some regard that he was fed copious amounts of cereal-based feeds. He was very hot, sharp, reactive, didn't hold condition, came to me at 6 but looked 3. He was like a weed. And changing on to a more forage-based diet, it's entirely changed his temperament. He is still sharp, reactive, hot, stressy at times, but generally a much more level-headed chap. People that meet him now that knew him before, you know, don't recognise him as the same horse. And he's now fat and has become a very good doer. I'm having to feed him less and less as such that he's done, you know, really well on that more forage-based system. He's a classic case of a horse that, you know, can't digest those higher levels of starch. They just go to his head, you know, they don't do him any goodness for his body. They just fry his brain. And now that he's more settled and, yeah, he's become a much better doer, which is nice. So, I mean, from our range, he's fed our Sainfoin and Shine, our Lucy Nuts, and our Calm Balance Plus at varying amounts through the year, which is quite nice with our feeding system. A bit different to others is that we don't have sort of set feeding rates. So with a lot of, you know, feeding systems, you have to feed, you know, 500 kilo horse, you have to feed it 2 kilos to give it, you know, the nutrient levels it needs, or, you know, the full balance of vitamins, minerals, this, that, and the other. Whereas with our feeding system, the balances obviously have a set feeding rate. They are designed on body weight, but everything else you feed according to the horse because they're all different. We can't tell you to feed 2 kilos because for one horse it's going to make them fat, for one horse it's not going to be enough. So it is very much a case of feeding by eye, which I think a lot of owners actually struggle with, because when, you know, we're there to hold their hand, but equally we're kind of saying you need to know your horse and make the decision for them. You know what they need to be fed. So it's a bit different for some people there. And then Maisie, the pony, being your classic Welsh cross, she's always been a very good doer, always has struggled, touch wood, not with laminitis, but she is one of those types that, would come down with it if you, took your eye off the ball sort of thing. So she's fed very minimally on our organic Lucy stalks and total eclipse balancer, because she just doesn't, she doesn't really need a feed, but it keeps her out of the way while the others are eating and gives them a bit of a break, bless them, and she likes it.
I have a question, and I am very interested because I tend to steer away from alfalfa or lucerne, same thing, different name. And you feed your hot-blooded guy alfalfa. Have you had that? Has that conversation been brought up to you about that being a kind of quite like some of the barefoot community? And I'm not saying this is fact. I'm just going on what I have been spoken about. That alfalfa can be quite inflammatory. Can you talk to me a little bit about where this may be, whether you know about this, whether it comes from? Is this relevant?
It's probably, it's a conversation I probably have weekly, if not daily, because there's a lot of, say, bad press around lucerne or alfalfa. And I think a lot of it stems, unfortunately, from America, which is why we as a company call it lucerne, which is the UK European term, to try and create that division between UK grown lucerne and American grown alfalfa, because whilst they're the same plant, it might even be the same species of the same plant, a bit coming back to our ryegrass, they're grown and produced in very different ways. So in America, alfalfa in the traditional sense is grown as a cattle fattener, so they want it to be as high protein, as high sugar, as nutritious as they can get it, and obviously any surplus in their industry will pass on into the horse industry. A lot of feed research is also done in America, so when they're researching these things, they will generally again be using American alfalfa, which is likely to be very rich, very nutritious. In the UK and in Europe, and obviously specifically at our company, we ensure that it is grown to kind of a horse species appropriate level of nutrition, and lucerne is in many ways one of the best forage types you can feed, because it's reliably high quality protein but reliably low in sugar and starch. You would probably struggle to find a lower sugar forage type that can give you the nutritional benefit of the protein, of the mineral richness. So I find, personally in my own circumstances, it suited him really well, because in the first place, when he was poor conditioned, it gave him the protein for muscle growth but low sugar and starch to keep his energy where I wanted it. So I've always found it really well suited. They are both barefoot, have always been barefoot. I hope to never put shoes on them, and their feet have probably never been better since having lucerne, because of the mineral richness. And again, also from the digestive perspective, lucerne is that natural buffer of acid, so if you've got any with ulcer concerns, it's again a really good forage type to make use of to try and support them digestively from that perspective. So there is always going to be horses that do not suit it, because no one diet will suit every single horse, and you will get a horse that is intolerant to it from a skin sense, intolerant to it from a behaviour sense, but it's certainly not the norm. I think it's very much, an exception to the rule. And again, another issue in general is that a lot of products on the UK market that contain lucerne won't be pure lucerne. And the problem is lucerne then gets the blame, but actually the lucerne has been blended with straw, with molasses, with soya, with something else, and it's potentially more likely that it's that ingredient they're reacting to. But people see the word alfalfa, they've read something on Facebook, and they just blame that, rightly or wrongly, because we've had a few customers, because we call it lucerne, which obviously confuses some people, they don't do the research perhaps into what lucerne is, so they just feed it, come to us for advice and discussion and say, oh, I don't want to feed alfalfa, and it's like, you've been feeding lucerne for the last 2 years and their horse has done really well on it, and they just make that link that perhaps it wasn't the lucerne that was the issue and the problem, it was the soya, the straw, the cereals, the something else. So
fascinating. I'm glad I asked, because I think it's one of those things when you hear something or you read something and you generally kind of follow that line of thinking, but it's not necessarily based on I don't know, it's kind of like a few small stories that lead together to give you a bigger picture. But thank you for clearing that up. I really appreciate it. That was
like I say, it's a commonly asked one. So now a good question to ask.
Just while we're on the subject of that, that's kind of blown my mind. Are there any other American versus British ways of growing things that we should know about? Because I would never have even thought about the fact that obviously our online discourse is global, and so quite often we get American and English schools of thought blending together. Is alfalfa probably the best example, or are there any other things that you're like, well, actually, when people talk about this, there's also differences?
I think alfalfa is the main kind of global difference we see. But I think we're actually in a fortunate position in that our feeding system is so much better than America anyway. They are very bad at putting waste products, byproducts, poor quality but overly nutritious ingredients in there. It's very heavily processed. I mean, as we know from perhaps American human food diets, they don't have the healthiest choices, and I think feeding in America is behind where we are even, and we still feel that we've got some advances to make. But I think the alfalfa lucerne split is a big the main one, really, I would say.
Ellen, I have a question that I ask everybody. Don't be scared. It's not a scary question. I have a question that I ask everyone at the end of the podcast. And the question is, if you had one thing that you could say to every equestrian and they had to listen, like they had to do the thing that you were saying, what would that one thing be?
My one thing is always read your ingredients lists and be confident in, or happy at least, in the choices that you are making for your horse. If you read the ingredients lists and you are happy with everything that is listed there, crack on and keep feeding it. But if there's something you don't recognise, something you're not happy feeding, there's an alternative. Find it at the end of the day.
Just to elaborate on that, if somebody was to read their bag of feed and there was something that stood out to them, what would be the things that you would be reading on one of those bags that was like a glaring red flag for you?
Yeah, so I am obviously through Simple System, but through my own development of horses, I would always be very cereal free. I would not want there to be any cereal inclusion, but I think a big thing is soya as well, not just from the nutritional, risks that there are with it potentially for our horses, but also the environmental impact.
Thank you very much. That was very succinct. Well, Ellen, thank you so much for joining us. This has been absolutely fascinating. My head hurts a bit because there's a lot of information that's gone in. But I hope that people will take a lot from this and will really go and look at what they're feeding their horses, because as someone who runs a big yard full of many complicated creatures, I am so pertinently aware of the importance of what we feed our horses. I meet the weirdest of the weird, and often changing their diet is an enormous part of their progression and their learning and their life going forward and their health. And we didn't really get to talk about health that much, but I'm sure people can read between the lines of the importance of the way the digestive system works. But thank you, Ellen. It's been really very interesting.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Like I say, not here to preach a change, but hopefully just get people thinking about it and questioning what they're doing. And we're here to give answers if they need them.
We'll share all the details of things we've talked about in the show notes. And as always, you can always DM Miri and myself or the podcast, This Equestrian Life Pod, on Instagram if you have any other questions or comments or whatever. And we will see you next week. Bye for now.